Well, g'day and welcome back to Reality Check. And back by popular demand is Dr. Max Derekshani, who has done two previous shows with us on lunar anomalies. Today, we're delving back into even more anomalies on the moon that frankly require investigation, which we have or are in the process of directing questions to NASA about. And more importantly, he's also going to take us to the red planet today, Mars. But let me give a brief introduction before we bring Max on. Finally, Max Derekshani, as we all know, is a theoretical physicist and philosopher of physics with a PhD in the foundations of physics from Utrecht University in the Netherlands. He's previously worked as a postdoctoral fellow at Rutgers University, New Brunswick, and Utrecht University. Currently, he's a senior science advisor to the CO2 Coalition, a fellow of the John Bell Institute for the Foundations of Physics, a member of the Foundational Questions Institute, a member of the Scientific Coalition for UAP Studies, and a member of the Society for Planetary SETI Research. His research interests span various aspects of quantum physics, general relativity, quantum gravity, statistical physics, philosophy of science, climate science, the scientific study of UAPs, and what we're bringing him in here today for, the scientifically rigorous searches for extraterrestrial artifacts on the moon and Mars. Welcome, Dr. Max Derekshani. G'day and welcome back to Reality Check, Max.
Thank you for having me again, Ross. I'm really glad to be here.
So, Max, before we get into the delights that we have today, tell me what's been the response professionally to you for the work that you've done with us on Reality Check, revealing, I think, quite scientifically legitimate concerns about anomalous, apparently artificial-looking objects on the lunar surface.
Well, my colleagues in the areas of planetary SETI research have been generally very pleased with it and supportive. I haven't really received much of any critical feedback or really any feedback from my colleagues in mainstream physics areas. Um, and I don't know if that's because they just don't know what to think about it, or they maybe are interested, but they don't want to show the interest in some way. So it's hard to say. But generally speaking, I'm pleased to see that I haven't really received any fiercely negative feedback from anybody thus far.
And there's some quietly supportive feedback behind the scenes as well from people who are basically interested to see where you're going.
Yes, that is certainly true, and we'll see if it leads perhaps to maybe other people getting interested. I think the combination of the moon and Mars together might pique people's interest even more.
So before we get into today, I don't think I've ever asked you this question. Do you believe there are artificial structures on the moon and possibly also Mars?
Yes, I think it's highly likely. I think it's more likely than not, given a couple of things. One is the physical evidence from all this imaging data, some of which I showed in the previous two episodes, some of which I'll show again, which I'll show here, and as well because of various estimates made by people like Carl Sagan using Drake's equation about the likely number of times our solar system has been visited by galactic civilizations over the past billion years or so. I think those estimates are quite plausible, and it comes out to tens of thousands of visitations as a plausible estimate. And so if that happened, it's, I think, almost a certainty that they left something behind in the solar system, and the moon and Mars are two of the most natural candidates for places to leave something.
Okay, Max, well, let's dive in. Take us to another adventure. Let's start with the lunar surface. Where do you want to take us?
Yes, I wanted to very briefly remind the readers about this Sagan estimate that he did in 1963. basically doing some calculations with something called Drake's equation, he estimated that the Earth has been visited by various galactic civilizations many times during geological time, possibly 10,000. And geological time means about 1 billion years. And then he says it's not out of the question that artifacts like these still exist, or that some kind of base is maintained. And then he mentions the moon, and he talks about rectangular arrays and thermodynamic departures from thermodynamic equilibrium in photographs of planetary surfaces as the thing to look at, the thing to focus on and emphasize. And we saw this ancient fortress, the Coromesian fortress, which is about 2,000 years old or so.
And this is on
Or,
Earth, to be very
this
quick
is
to our audience.
correct. This is on Earth before excavation, after excavation. And to this point, I also had Google AI assemble a table of what skyscrapers in New York City would look like after degradation on the Earth, the Moon, and Mars from 100,000 years from today to up to 1 billion years from today. And I just wanted to kind of give people the context for what we're doing here, to remind them that we are not expecting to see pristine artificial spacecraft or bases on the moon or on Mars necessarily. I mean, it would be great if they're there, but most likely what we are looking to see or expecting to find is something like an highly eroded or ruined base or object or something left behind. And just to give some context, for skyscrapers on Earth, if let's say they were left on the moon, in 100,000 years, the buildings would become this matte frosted type complexion, and glass would become opaque. After 1 million years, structures would be covered in dark lunar dust and surfaces would look moth eaten with visible pits because of constant meteoric bombardment, micrometeoric bombardment. And after 10 million years, they would start to lean and the walls would start thinning and they would look like Swiss cheese from impacts. After 100 million years, we would have shattered skeletons. Essentially, heavy steel or titanium frames would remain looking like jagged sandblasted ribs. And after 1 billion years, the buildings would be basically pummeled into the ground, the regolith, and it would look like a gray hill of dust with occasional metallic glints. And there would be a similar type of erosive process on Mars. Obviously, this also depends on what the buildings or structures are made of. But the point is that we should expect to see something broadly along these lines. So we should expect to see very ancient structures heavily eroded. So,
If there
yeah.
was a civilization that existed on Mars, say 1 million years ago, the implications are there wouldn't be much left of that civilization that would be discernible as a signature of an intelligent civilization.
Right. It wouldn't look at least immediately discernible. It looks like they would look like they could be part of the natural geology, but there would be anomalies in the geology, maybe unusual rectilinear, rectangular geometries, for example,
Just like
or
we're
other
seeing,
anomalies.
and this is your point,
Yes,
just like we're seeing with a lot of the imagery you've already shown us from the moon.
exactly, exactly. And it turns out we can actually help ourselves. Not only can we look for these types of structures, look for rectangular arrays like Sagan refers to, or other types of deviations from thermodynamic equilibrium. There are algorithms that have been developed by various imaging engineers and analysts using fractal models to detect artificial objects on the surface of the Earth. This is one example from Michael Stein in 1987. There are other models which are texture based by Carlotto, for example, in 2010. These these detectors, these algorithm detectors, they have shown to be pretty successful in regards to artificial structures on the Earth's surface. They have about an 80% accuracy rate of identifying known artificial structures from satellite images of Earth. And there are also other such structures and formations that have been actually, or rather algorithms. Algorithms like the last two I showed you, they've also been applied to the surface of Mars. And I will show some examples. This is an example paper from Carlotto and Stein in the 1990s, and we will see some examples later on. Last time I showed you an example of these algorithms being applied in the case of satellite image of Earth. Buildings appear as these very bright areas, and the roads as brighter areas, and then the natural terrain as very dark areas. And when applied to the Paracelsus Sea structures, buildings, and monoliths, we see that they stand out as these bright rectilinear structures, according to the algorithm. And these very extremely bright mounds also stand out. And here's an example of a fractal algorithm applied by Carlotto to an airport. The fractal algorithm basically picks up on objects that are very low in self-similarity. Natural terrain tends to have this self-similar character so that a smaller portion is similar to a larger portion of it. But not so with artificial structures like airplanes or buildings and so on, as this algorithm shows here. Okay, so now I just wanted to give this background to prepare people, because I'm going to show some images that are going to make use of these algorithms as like a supplement to our visual analysis. So perhaps the first thing I'll do is I would like to start with an anomaly discovered near the North Pole of the Moon. So an anonymous viewer of the first interview got in contact with you, if I remember correctly, and he told us that there is something unusual looking on the edge of a crater near the North Pole of the Moon. And he noted that it no longer appears in some of the public imaging of the Moon, like, for example, the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter Quick Map. Just to give you an illustration, so this is a publicly available three-dimensional map of the Moon. This is the North Pole of the Moon, and we can just zoom in to pretty good resolution anywhere pretty much on the Moon. And in this case, we are looking at a crater called Plaskett, and this is Plaskett U, a satellite of the bigger crater Plaskett. If we zoom in on this edge here, it's quite blurry, hopelessly blurry. We can't really see any of the detail on the surface of the Moon. So it looks like nothing interesting is there. However, I managed to find this article published by the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter team with higher resolution images of the North Pole, Plaskett and Plaskett U. So this is the same area as we saw in the quick map. And this article was apparently published in 2026, maybe earlier. It's hard to say because it's not dated. And what I noticed is that if I look at this very same spot that our anonymous viewer friend told us about, if we zoom in here, there's much better resolution.
Oh, yeah.
Much better resolution. And not only that, but over here, there is something interesting. There's this tinier crater. Let me show you this exact same view in the quick map.
So this is the previously publicly released NASA image?
Yes. So this is for the public that NASA puts out. So anybody can go to this website and type in these coordinates and look here for themselves. This one I just found because they have this whole mosaic of images, and I just happened to do some meticulous searching in those images, and I stumbled on this. So this area with this interesting structure with this shadow is this here, completely blurred out in the public quick map.
Do
So
you
let's
think that's do you think that's deliberate, Max, knowing what you're about to show me?
I can't say for sure, but I wouldn't rule out the possibility, especially in light of the previous discussions about the Space Act and the Brookings Report and the Clementine mission imagery, and I think that's a
Okay.
possibility. And perhaps this just fell through the cracks or was unintentionally left in. But notice how much better resolution we can get here, and notice what we're looking at. There seems to be a tower-like structure. Actually, we'll see that it's actually two of them
It's
with a
very
very,
tall. Look at that shadow. Wow.
yeah, very long shadow. And I'll say I've actually calculated based on the known sun angle how tall the structure is based on the size of the shadow and the sun angle. And it turns out to be about 95 feet, which is roughly the height of the Artemis 2 rocket that sent astronauts to the moon recently.
Wow.
And so that's quite tall. And notice there's all this other surrounding debris, and something has rolled
Oh my God. That looks
into
like
a little crater.
go in a bit closer, Max. That looks like vehicle tracks.
Yeah, so I cannot go in closer in this particular image. However, I managed to find the raw image strip in NASA's Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter archives. So
Love your work, Max.
this
Love
is
your
it.
work.
Yeah, I took some work, but I was able to stumble on it. So this is the same structure right here,
Wow.
and we can get a little bit better resolution. Now we can see the second one here, as well as the first one.
Oh, this was a good tip we got from our viewer, wasn't it?
Yeah, yeah, it was very interesting. And what I like about this example also is that these structures, which are quite tall, there's nothing like them, at least not of the same extent. There is this other smaller set here, but nothing nearly this big in any direction in this terrain. And there's no indication of anything like skid marks. It's not like these structures like skidded in from somewhere else. There's no series of craters which indicate that it like bounced to arrive here. They're just here, sitting here in
And
this otherwise consistent terrain. Hmm.
can I ask you, do things roll on the moon? You used the word
Oh, yes.
roll earlier. Is that track plausible as a rolling object?
Well, that would depend on how steep this surface area is on the edge of the crater. It's sort of hard to tell just how steep it is. Notice there is this crevice which might be the edge of another crater. This is definitely another crater edge, but it's hard to tell how flat or inclined this terrain is. So maybe, but it's kind of hard to say.
No,
The tracks
Max,
are quite consistent.
am I, we use the word
Like,
tracks.
mhm.
Am I, is this pareidolia on my part? Am I deluding myself visually? Do I see what looks like vehicle tracks? Two clear indentations into the lunar dust?
Well, they look like relatively regularly segmented indentations. So that's interesting. And it's not clear to me exactly that those would form just by some irregular boulder rolling down.
What's that
Um,
distance?
so this distance from here to here, if I were to estimate it, probably anywhere from 100, 500 feet to 1,000 feet would be my guess, my estimate. If I'm
And am
using
I deluding
conventional.
myself? Is there something inside that smaller crater down the left-hand side there?
Yes, so something it appears has rolled from here, one of these objects, down into here.
And this is the
And
closest you can
there's
go with
two.
it.
Yes, unfortunately, this is the closest we can go in the raw imaging data.
So
I
it looks
have,
like a blob, basically.
yeah, or something reflective. Something very shiny is reflecting the sunlight, even though it's in the shadowed area of the crater, it seems. And so the question would be, what could this pair of towers be exactly? It's hard for me to see how they could be meteoric debris or debris that was kicked up by another larger impact crater, which just happened to fall down. Because if it fell, I wouldn't expect it to be falling upright, sticking out orthogonal to the surface, and to be so tall. Um, Another possibility is that it's some type of artificial structure. And then the question is, well, what type? Maybe a base of some kind, but there are some other possibilities, which actually one of our, a well known physicist and SETI researcher, Paul Davies, discussed
Used
in
to
his
live.
article.
Used to live in Australia. Paul Davies, lovely
Yes,
man.
yes, he's well known in Australia, and he's the author of a very well known and highly respected textbook on quantum fields theory and curved spaces. He's a highly respected mainstream theoretical physicist. He's the director of the Beyond Center at Arizona State University. He published this in 2011, and he notes, in addition to the idea of a base, well, he mentions other possibilities with his co-author. He says a persistent science fiction theme is that of an alien artifact left on the moon's surface long ago, for example, Arthur C. Clarke. Such an artifact might originate in several ways, for example, discarded material from an alien expedition or mining operation, instrumentation deliberately installed to monitor Earth, or a dormant probe awaiting contact, a variant on the message in a bottle theme. Alien technology might also manifest itself in mining or quarrying activity or even construction work, traces of which might persist for millions of years. And he advocates for using the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter data to look for them exactly as we're doing here.
So, Dr. Max Derikshani, are we talking about a Space Odyssey 2001 type monolith on the moon? Is that a distinct possibility?
I think it's absolutely a distinct possibility, certainly worthy of consideration. What I might do is just, if it might be of interest as well, I can zoom in into these structures with much greater detail resolution using Topaz Labs Gigapixel upscaling software.
Oh, come on.
So
Seriously.
this
There are
is,
multiple tracks there, Max.
yeah,
Gotcha.
yeah. There's one here, and there. Notice these other objects are just sitting still. They
They
didn't
look like
bounce in
they
from
look like
anywhere.
radomes, and they're all casting quite a shadow as well.
Yeah, they're all casting long shadows. Um, they're all just sitting there quietly, and so it does raise a question of, could this in fact be something like what Davis is talking about? Maybe a dormant probe waiting to be accessed. Maybe it's a monolith of some sort. Maybe it's some trash or debris, some defunct probe, something of that sort. It doesn't look like it just crashed into the surface.
But more
That's
importantly, it's not congruent. It's not consistent with the rest of the lunar surface. This is
exactly.
this is anomalous.
Yes, I would say so. And to that point, further to that point, if we apply the algorithms that I showed earlier, for example, this is the fractal algorithm, to this area, the brightest area in this image, that is the least fractal or the most anomalous, according to this algorithm, this artificial object detector that's used in satellite imaging by the military and private satellite companies. The towers are the ones that are the most anomalous,
Yeah.
according to that algorithm. And not just this one, but if we go to the other algorithm, we see also that it stands out very starkly as
Oh, yeah.
anomalous. So we
A
also
big
had
blob.
as a big bright blob. Yeah. So clearly, according to these two algorithms, which are well tested, well confirmed, and used in various military and private applications, using our own reasoning about lunar geology and looking for general criteria as to what artificial structures might be like, this is a very promising candidate. And NASA has apparently never noticed this or discussed it. So it remains a possibility there that I think is worth exploring further. Or
Well,
maybe
thank you.
NASA's aware, but they don't want to tell us. Who knows?
I just want to thank the viewer that sent that into us. And I'm really grateful, Max, that you've done your digging and you found those more high resolution images. Can I ask you this? Do you think
Yeah.
NASA perhaps released those images this year by accident, not realizing what they were releasing?
That's always a possibility, I think.
You're very
There are millions
diplomatic.
of images. There are millions of images of the moon, and I would expect some things, even if the intention is to hide things or to scrub these images of genuine anomalies, some things will fall through the cracks at
So
some
let's
point.
just ask ourselves. This is at the north pole of the moon.
Right.
Is there any geographical advantage conferred to, for example, say a monolith type structure or a base or some kind of communication structure if it's located on a pole? I noticed that the Artemis mission is focused on the
Yeah.
south pole of the moon. I'm really interested now to know whether there's something on the south pole. But why is the pole of a lunar object important? Is there anything in it?
The pole itself is just a place that would be convenient to hide something because if they wanted to be discreet. The reason is because it's very dark over there. We can see that by looking at the previous image, maybe not specifically this one, but here it tends to be darker.
I see. Yeah.
And
So
so
it's a
and you
good
can't see it directly.
hideout. It's a good hideout.
Potentially. Yeah,
Yeah.
just like the backside, the far side of the moon, the poles could also be good hideouts.
Right. Well, that's a zinger. I mean, we'll put that on the list for us to put to the new NASA administrator and ask him what the hell's going on. Why is it that their original photographs released to the public are blurred, apparently quite deliberately? And why is it that the perhaps inadvertent release this year of objects appears to show something artificial?
Yeah, I think it's a fair question to ask them why this discrepancy and what do they think it is, or do they have any interest in exploring it and to see what they say? Um,
Wow. Well, you've
yeah.
really got me going there, Max. That's exciting. Keep on going. I'm in your hands.
All right. So this second example is was given to me or brought to my attention by our friend Jeff Cruikshank, who's a brilliant
Another Aussie?
another Aussie, brilliant intelligence analyst, brilliant researcher, and he brought this to my attention. I was not previously aware of it. He said, "Here's this Schrödinger anomaly you should look at in this Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter article, Secrets of Schrödinger." So this is in an area of the moon, a sinuous reel on the near side called Valles Schrödinger, and it's right around here. And anybody can look at this in the quick map as well, but it's very blurry, so you can't really see what we're going to see unless you can access the raw images or read this article. Because in this article, they post a really high quality pair of images. And so this is the full narrow angle camera image that we're going to look at. If we zoom in here, first of all, we see there's all this debris on this reel, but then there's also something that has apparently moved in a track.
Yeah, another one. Oh my goodness.
And this is about as close as we can get in this image. If I remember correctly, yes. And then this is also the raw image strip showing the same sort of structure from a different direction. So this is a different image in different direction, slightly oblique. But we can get a better picture or a better view by using the upscaling software, the professional grade.
And just to be
AI
clear,
upscaler.
this is software that's used by NASA itself. It's not some algorithm that's creating false pareidolik imagery.
Yeah, this software is professional grade. It is trained on millions of images, Earth-based, but also not Earth-based. NASA does use it sometimes to upscale its imaging, and it's not like free AI upscaling software that produces extra legs or ears or whatever the case may be on objects in photographs. And so we can have a pretty good degree of confidence that what it's showing us is reliable. So here is an example of the upscaling. So this is one upscaling model that it produces.
Yeah, that
So
looks perfectly natural, Max. There's nothing at all artificial
yeah,
about that.
yeah, and notice this looks all connected. This set of blocks or whatever they may be, they look all bounded together, and yet the
Yeah.
track that's forming with these periodic humps seems to be only formed by these three guys. I don't quite understand how tracks like this could form from an object this wide, which is much wider than the tracks themselves.
Do we
And
have any idea how high that object is based on the shadows you're seeing
yes,
there?
yes. So I managed to calculate using the raw imaging data in that previous image to estimate the height of this object and the height of these objects based on the length of the shadows and the sun angle. So the other image I showed you gives you that information. And it comes out to about the height of this one, this right angular-ish structure is about 10 to 15 feet tall. And this one is about 20 to 25 feet tall based on the longer shadow. So taller than a person, not necessarily the size of a building, but perhaps the size of something that could be like a vehicle of some kind. That would be my, at least roughly human sized.
Wow.
And so this is another upscaling model from Topaz Labs Gigapixel applied to this image. And yeah, this one makes it look more rectilinear. We can zoom in further and get a better shot from the two models. And we can get a broader view and do an upscaling with the broader view, but it produces a very similar result. And we can also apply the two algorithms, the fractal algorithm and the texture-based or bits algorithm. Let's look at the fractal algorithm. So remember, the brighter the areas, the less fractal, hence the more anomalous. Well, what is extremely bright and standing out, among other things? It's the probe, or whatever we want to call it, the Schrödinger anomaly.
Whereabouts is this Schrödinger anomaly, Max?
Let me open this. Do you mean whereabouts in the image or whereabouts on?
No, we're in the moon. Where on the moon? Is it on a pole?
It's, if I remember correctly, it's on the near side facing Earth, so not near a pole. But let's see. So what I can do, if there is interest, I can try to type in the coordinates of Valles Schrödinger in this global map, and then it will show us.
No, it really doesn't matter. But I think the point that you've made is a valid one. That I see. Okay.
So it's
Near
It's
side,
here.
kind of slap bang in the middle. Okay.
Yeah, exactly.
Wow. So, I mean, that you've raised there two, I think, entirely legitimate questions about
Hmm.
what appear to be, how does one say this, anomalous objects that are not consistent with the rest of the lunar landscape that your fractal algorithms are assessing as anomalous. Um, if you were a scientist investigating any planet and you were looking for life, where would you go on the planet if you had objects like that? You'd focus on those, wouldn't you?
That's what I would do. I would say, is there something that is geologically anomalous in regards to lunar geology? Is it anomalous compared to the surrounding terrain? And given that we have good reasons, general reasons to think that there could be something extraterrestrial left on the moon, we should find the most promising candidates and then send probes or astronauts to go and examine them in more detail. That is certainly what I would do.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, I mean, I think you've raised entirely legitimate questions. I, what I don't understand, what I don't understand is why science hasn't taken a lot of these lunar anomalies seriously, and is. I mean, I'm not saying NASA is covering up, but there is a legitimate question now in my mind, especially with the first North Pole image you showed us. Is
Yeah.
NASA deliberately obscuring images to hide what's on the lunar surface?
It's a question that has to be asked, I think, because if a scientist outside of NASA can find these images in their own data, it's hard to believe that they have or can find anomalies like these in their own data. It's hard to believe that they, as a team or as a group of scientists, have not found anomalies, similar such, or maybe the same anomalies. And
Yeah.
they haven't told the public if that's the case. And so, yeah, it raises a number of questions. And hopefully we can get some answers or, you know, from the new administrator of NASA, especially in connection with President Trump's recent pledge to release all of the files related to extraterrestrials.
Well, you got to say it for the president. He's promising transparency, so let's make sure we include these in the questions that get asked. Keep on going, Max. I'm enjoying this.
Okay. Very good. I just wanted to show people that the Paracelsus C structures, that they also show or are confirmed by the algorithms as unusual. So I managed to actually code the algorithms according to Carlotto and Stein's papers into a Python script and then apply them. And the results match what Carlotto and Stein have found in their other contexts, other applications. So we can take them as trustworthy for these newer lunar applications. So this is the original Paracelsus C structures on the left, and this is what the algorithm shows on the right. It picks them out, but not just them. Mm-hmm.
And for those of our audience that haven't watched the previous programs, I recommend that you join us. You put into the Reality Check search engine Dr. Max Derikshani, and you will find his exposition of the Paracelsus C objects in the previous shows.
Yes, so it's this trio here, and then these very, very bright mounts. And it's not just
perfectly natural looking rectilinear objects there.
Yeah. And another test I did that is also insightful is, according to those tests of those algorithms on terrestrial objects and formations, they tend to be more accurate when the sun angle is lower, or rather when the sun angle is above the horizon is lower than higher. So to test this, I found an image of the Paracelsus C structures when the sun angle was higher. That's on the left. And the algorithm still picks them out, but they're fainter.
Right.
But now if we look at that structures with a much lower, steeper sun angle. So this is a third distinct image that I found.
Oh, it definitely sees anomalies. Yeah.
Yeah. Now it's more prominent. And so the Paracelsus C structures respond to the algorithms in precisely the way that artificial structures on Earth respond to the algorithms. So
Right.
that's another a piece of evidence. And also the fractal algorithm shows that they are the most anomalous of all of them because they are the only areas where you see white spots here, which indicate
Right.
the least fractal areas. So now it's not just a subjective eye test. We also have these objective, ground truth, validated algorithms that support it. And so that's a nice, helpful additional piece of evidence, I think.
Wow. Okay. Wonderful. This is all good fun. Keep us going, Max. I'm excited.
Very good. So I will now go to, let's see, the deforest structures or formations.
And we're still on the moon here?
We are still on the moon. Yes, sir. Let's see, where should I start? Perhaps I'll go to the deforest objects. Yeah, so let's do that. In the previous episode, we went to another crater on the lunar far side. Paracelsus C was on the far side. Deforest crater is another one on the far side. And we saw a number of anomalous, unusual structures on the far side, inside this crater. One was this wishbone-shaped looking tower structure, as shown in the left-hand image. And I applied the fractal algorithm to it. And they respond. But in addition, the surrounding terrain also produces a very strong response to the algorithm.
Oh, that's interesting.
The tower, especially here on the left. And it's not just this particular object, but we can also, apologies, this is a zoom in. This is a different algorithm rather, the BITS algorithm. This one produces a very sharp response from the wishbone-shaped structure. And I should stress there's no fine tuning in any of this. I'm just applying the very same algorithm to an image with no other additional inputs. So the algorithm is saying, this is very anomalous, this wishbone-shaped structure, look here.
Right.
And again, in this zoom out view of the wishbone-shaped structure in the forest crater, you can see it's picked out. So we have a broad view and a very close-up view, again, validating the same results. And we also saw that there are these spires in the forest crater, a trio or four in what looks like a row. And if we look at the shadows of them, they look very castle-like as spires. And in terms of their height. Yeah, and in terms of their size, I calculated this based on, again, the shadow length, the sun angle in this photograph. They are about the height of like 1/3, half to 2/3 the height of the Eiffel Tower in France, in Paris, France. So these are very tall structures, these three in a row. And the algorithm, the fractal one, picks them out, sure enough, especially this one in the bottom here. And
now, I know you're not a geologist, Max, but is there anything that could be intrinsic to the moon's geology that could explain the formation of such anomalous rock-like, assuming they are natural objects? Is there anything about the geology of the moon that might explain how such objects could form? Something the height of or part of the height of the Eiffel Tower?
Indeed, I'm not a geologist, but to the best of my understanding of lunar geology and NASA's understanding of lunar geology, there is no plausible geological mechanism that on the moon that could produce towers like these because, number one, volcanic activity does not occur on the moon, or at least it ended around 3 billion years ago, at least in most vast majority of the moon. There are no tectonic plates to shift underneath. There are moonquakes, but the moonquakes are very, very weak by comparison, and they don't produce uplifted, sharp spire-like structures like this. Overwhelmingly, the erosion that occurs on the moon is by micrometeoric bombardment because of the lack of the moon's atmosphere to burn up micrometeorites. So this bombardment, this constant rain of micrometeors, just produces this erosive, flattening effect. And if these were formed, say, billions of years ago, these structures within this crater, sometime after the crater was produced, well, they would have been subject to billions of years of micrometeoric bombardment. And if that were the case, I don't see how they could have these rectilinear, sharp, spire-like geometries. They should be very flat, smooth mounds by now. So I frankly don't see what plausible lunar geological mechanism there is. I'm open to people trying to propose alternatives, but I just don't see it myself.
Wow. Okay. Gee, fascinating. Keep on rolling, my friend.
Okay. Well, continuing on, the other algorithm, again, really responds strongly to the spires. And again, this is just a distance view. We see the same sort of algorithmic strong response. This is another mouth-like structure in the crater, in the same area. I just call it that as a metaphor because it looks like a mouth to me. But essentially, it's a very big structure. Again, building sized. The algorithm responds to it.
Can we zoom in at all, or is that the closest we can get?
In this particular image, we can zoom in like this, but it gets blurry. I do have a very high resolution image of it, but in this particular comparison image, this is about as sharp as we can get.
Right, okay.
But it does produce this very sharp response, unlike anything else. So, yeah.
Can we see the super high resolution version?
Sure. So let me then go to this list. I just have to make sure. Okay, so this is the original, if I remember correctly. Yes, this is the original from the raw image strip. So we can get quite close, but then it gets a little bit pixelated and blurred.
Hard to know, really.
Yeah. And the algorithm, or rather the upscaling software applied to it, produces something like this, as this is the upscaled feature. So again, if we think about erosion on the moon, if this was an artificial structure, but ancient, billions of years old, it could well have been pummeled into something like this mouth-like eroded structure. But then the question would be, what's inside of it? If there was something artificial inside of it, they could well remain intact because there's no air or water to erode anything inside of the structure.
Couldn't the mouth just be a shadow caused by a lip of rock?
This could be. So it could be that it's not actually hollow, but we can't really tell either way from this particular image. The sun is coming from the right.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why it's very bright here. This is the most reflective part. So it could be, it looks to me like there's an indentation here. So it does look to me like there's an inside region, but to be really sure, we would need to send something there to it directly. And so that's that's the example of the forest crater. Some samples, there are more examples, but those are just the ones that I sort of chose to highlight. We also looked last time at Aristarchus, the brightest crater on the surface of the moon, or at least large crater. And on the left is the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter's image at high frequency lighting, so near the UV spectrum. And we see that it's very, very bright compared to the surrounding lunar terrain. And again, the algorithm responds to it quite strongly, at least the bits algorithm does. The fractal algorithm doesn't respond to it very strongly, so I haven't included that. But within Aristarchus crater, apologies, let me just back up. There is this, this is an oblique image from the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter of Aristarchus. And if you open this image and you zoom in around here near the floor of this extremely bright crater that we discussed in the second interview, we find that there is something unusual, and I will just go to it. There is this object or structure that, to me at least, looks like it could be like a cave entry or an entry into some sort of hill of some kind, with this being
it's certainly like, it almost looks like a concrete, a battered concrete cube.
Yeah, and well, a cube, and also I see this as a U-shaped cylindrical top area or ceiling. And well, we can actually get a better view. This is one possible upscaling from gigapixel. This is another. And what's really striking to me about it is also that the fractal algorithm responds very strongly to it, as does the bits algorithm.
The enigma of Aristarchus.
Yeah, so Aristarchus is showing anomalies within anomalies. So not just the crater itself from a far view, but even things inside of it have interesting features. And NASA has never actually visited Aristarchus crater with a rover or with manned missions. There was a plan to do so on Apollo 18, but then Apollo 18 was canceled, and so that never happened. But now, apart from that, there are many different directions or examples we could go in. This one I like, and it's a bit different. This is an oblique image taken by the mapping camera from Apollo 17 as they were orbiting the moon. So this crater here is called Heakel crater. If you were to look at it from a top-down view, direct view, you would see that it has an inside platform that's very triangular-like. And it's surrounded by all of this white surface highlands, or what seem to be highlands. There's also this interesting cylindrical-looking structure with this little arm extending out that casts this shadow. And there are all these other very interesting surface features.
What does that suggest to you?
Well, notice how rectilinear this highland surface appears to be. And so it looks to me like it's highly geometrical. It looks to me like there is a lot of unusual geometry.
Yeah, there's a lot of lines running in that direction. You know, it's
yes. And so we can test that too. We can again apply the algorithms. So the first one produces a pretty strong response to all of this area or terrain. And not just this, but also the fractal algorithm gives a very strong response, especially up here, this row of structures, and also around the edge of the crater.
Fascinating.
So I think it's interesting to take a closer look at Euclid crater. And
When Apollo 17 flew over it, did they acknowledge the anomalousness of it?
that's a good question. There are transcripts of them talking about what they're seeing. I could go check and see if they.
Yeah, let us know. I'd love to know whether they picked it up as something anomalous.
Yeah, yeah, that's a good question. A friend of mine actually claims he or says he spoke with astronaut Edgar Mitchell many years ago when he was still alive in New York City and asked him what's inside Euclid crater and said he got an interesting response. But I, I'd have to, I'd have to probe him a bit more to find out exactly what he was told. But to continue on, another interesting example to me is this one from the lunar orbiter. So the lunar orbiter was a imaging probe that was sent to the moon before any of the Apollo missions in, I guess, the mid 1960s. And so it took these black and white images of a certain region of the moon in this case. And this image shows what I think are some interesting surface features or patterns. For example, around here, if we were to zoom in to this image, right around here, there are these ripples and rectilinear indentations patterns in the otherwise the mare surface.
Oh, yeah.
That's usually smooth. And not just there, but also further up here, around to the left, and also around here and here. And so again, we can apply the algorithms shown earlier and see what they say. And
they
sure enough,
agree.
They agree, especially this one with the little circular area. A very strong response. Again, thinking about it in context, if there was some sort of structure built around here, say 1 billion years ago, by now it would probably be imprinted into the soil surface as a technofossil, as the AI comparison mentioned. And I should say that I didn't just use Google AI, but I've used also other AIs like Grok, but also I've researched the question, generally speaking, what would skyscrapers of New York City look like under erosion on the moon, on Earth, on Mars? And there, it turns out there's a literature on that. What would structures look like under erosive processes on different planets? And so these are all scientifically informed sort of extrapolations. But this particular algorithm confirms that there is something geometrically anomalous here, consistent with Sagan's criterion, and so does the other algorithm. So that's yet another example. But to sort of switch gears to something a bit different, there is an interesting example of a rock formation or boulder formation nearby the Apollo 12 lunar module on the surface of the moon. So this was discovered by Holger Eisenberg, who noticed it in an image from the Indian Space Agency's probe Chandrayaan-2 back in 2021. This is the Apollo 12 probe or lunar module on the surface. And then here you can see that there is what looks to be a ring-like boulder formation with a tall boulder in the center projecting the shadow. And this is 100 meters. So I guess you could say this is about 10 to 20 meters in diameter, approximately. And let me perhaps open this to get a better view. And it's about this, the width is larger than the width of the lunar module. So and the sizes of the rocks are about the sizes of the astronauts themselves. So far too big for the astronauts to have to just pick them up or place them there. A couple of my colleagues once suggested that maybe that's an explanation for how this ring-like formation could have been formed.
I was going to say, is it possible the astronauts did this?
Yeah, but then so they would be too big for the astronauts to like lift up, and we'll see an example of this.
Do we know? Did the Apollo 12 astronauts go to this site?
Yes. So this was their lunar module when they landed. This is they landed around here, and there are actually photographs of them walking. This is an upscaled version from Topaz Labs Gigapixel AI that confirms that the ring-like formation is real, or at least the AI sees it as well. Here's an image, a close-up of the ring formation in a surface photograph taken by one of the astronauts.
Looks less convincing to me there, to be honest.
Yes. So at this angle, it's kind of steep and you can't really see it, and there's no real context. So it's also in Surveyor 3, which is a robotic probe. So this is one of the astronauts, Alan Bean or Pete Conrad, one of the two. They're touching Surveyor 3. So what's interesting here is that the Surveyor 3 robotic probe landed here before any astronauts landed on the moon. And then Apollo 12 landed across from Surveyor 3 over there. And in between is this.
Which means NASA obviously attached some significance to this site.
It would seem so. And they say that the reason they landed here is because they wanted to retrieve something from the Surveyor 3 robotic probe, I guess perhaps some data. But it's also interesting that this unusual formation is there in between the two. To me, at least, that is an interesting coincidence. And there's the other kind of far out view. So Surveyor 3 probe and the lunar module, and then the ring formation seemingly in between the two. There is in the transcripts some indication that they noticed it, or that one of them noticed it. But I haven't prepared that offhand. This is another photograph from another person using
it ISO. Really does it from the top shot, it really does look like a deliberate object, an artificial structure.
Yeah, I mean, there's nothing at all like this, and thousands and thousands of photos of the lunar terrain looking straight down. You don't see anything like this at all, or at least I have not.
And am I mistaken? Is that 12 rocks? Is it a clock?
It's a cylindrical formation. Let's see. Probably here we can count a little bit better. 7, 8, 9, 10, maybe about 12 or so. It's
odd coincidence.
I mean, elliptical. Yeah,
it's hilarious.
It would be interesting, I think. Well, unfortunately, we can't ask Alan Bean because he's dead, and Pete Conrad is dead too. So we are kind of stuck. But it would be interesting to know if they had said something about it or noticed it before,
sure.
When they were alive, when they came back or made a comment. Yeah, and then as far as other examples go, yeah, I wanted to also say something about the blue ghost images of the lunar horizon glow that I showed in the first interview. So one of the questions that I raised or that I mentioned is that there's a question about, well, if you look closely at the original image, you would notice that there is a concentric dome-like layering in the lighting structure. in the lighting pattern. And the question was, is that a real pattern in whatever medium is scattering the light? Or is it an image artifact, for example, a JPEG compression artifact? And the question was an open one, and that's one of the reasons we sought to find unprocessed raw images of this horizon glow and to acquire them from Firefly Aerospace and NASA. But we were told that no such images were ever downlinked by Firefly and NASA. So, okay, we couldn't really address the question that way. So I tried to address it in a different way. The good thing about Topaz Labs gigapixel upscaling software is that it also has settings to address compression artifacts from, for example, JPEG compressed photographs. So it can decompress those photographs or remove compression artifacts that would, for example, produce color banding or banding of light. And so applying that software to this image, this is one model with maximum decompression applied. And well, the result is there is still dome-like layering in the lighting pattern that is visible. And it's not just in that particular model. Here is another model.
And just, Max, for our audience who didn't see the first show, can you explain why it's odd, why it's anomalous that there would be any kind of dome-like, what do you call it, glow?
Yes. The reason it would be anomalous is because, according to NASA, the cause of this glow in the first place, which I should note, the sun is actually, this is not the sun. The sun is somewhere below the horizon. So whatever is causing this lighting is some sort of medium above the lunar surface that is scattering sunlight coming from the sun or the solar disk that's below this horizon. And NASA's proposed explanation for decades was that dust is being electrostatically levitated from the lunar surface. And that dust, which is made up of a lot of glass-like material, is then refracting or scattering sunlight that's coming from below the horizon towards the camera. And that's what
sounds plausible to me.
Yeah, except NASA's own further studies of that hypothesis have disconfirmed it. In other words, they have not been able to confirm in various in situ measurements of the dust population that there is anywhere near enough dust to produce this sort of optical effect. And experiments in the lab have also shown that the levitating mechanism proposed doesn't actually work with actual lunar dust. And not only that, but even if it were the case, electrostatically levitated dust would not form layered dome-like geometric patterns. It would just be floating around incoherently like an incoherent cloud of dust.
So what's a plausible what's a plausible explanation for this, Max? Are we suggesting that this is something artificial?
Well, if it's not dust, but it's something glass-like that can semi-transparent that can refract sunlight, then we are essentially forced to infer that it's not dust, it's not gas, so it's some sort of other glass-like semi-transparent medium that extends up from the lunar surface into the lunar sky. If it's not something natural, then it's got to be something artificial. And that's an inference you can draw whether or not the concentric layering is real. But if in addition the concentric layering is real, as these Topaz upscaled images seem to imply, then that is further strong evidence that whatever medium is scattering the sunlight is not something naturally produced on the moon. And if it's not naturally produced on the moon, it's artificial and it's not human made.
Wow. Okay.
So
another
that's
mystery.
The significance of this. Yeah, and then these are other upscaling models that also show the same.
Why don't we call that the blue ghost globe?
Yeah, the blue ghost globe. That would be a good name for it, I think. And it's really surprising to me that NASA claims or Firefly Aerospace claims they did not downlink any unprocessed raw images because of this phenomenon, because this was the pinnacle of the mission on the final night of the mission, and they claim that these images are going to be used by scientists to study the lunar horizon glow phenomenon. And one would think that they would want the best quality images possible in order to do that, which JPEG compressed images are not. So anyway, that to me is a bit strange and questionable. But moving on to other examples, something that is not perhaps well known either is that there are pits and caves on the lunar surface that were discovered by the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter. My late colleague Fran Ridge at the Society for Planetary SETI Research wrote this interesting article in 2016 about these lunar caves. So the orbiter actually discovered these caves in the imaging. This is one example. It's a pit actually in the lunar surface. And here are some, this is one area, Rima Marius, Mare region. This is another pit or skylight. So this is actually like a hole in the lunar surface. These are some other ones discovered by...
so they're not just craters.
Right, exactly. This is another one where you can really see it in detail.
Wow.
There's this indentation here, and this is just a pit that runs deep. And apparently hundreds of these have been found by now by the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter. And what's interesting, the Reconnaissance Orbiter has now imaged over 200 pits as of 2016 that show the signature of being skylights into subsurface voids or caverns, ranging in diameter from about 16 feet to more than 2,950 feet in diameter. And it's not just these images, but NASA researchers have also discovered that some of these pits are connected by massive underground tubes that are enormous. Like we're talking about thousands of feet across and hundreds of feet high. This is an example. The Grail.
So when you say tubes, are you talking about constructed tunnels, or are you talking about something that's been created by natural processes?
Very good question. So the interpretation of these tubes is a natural is that of a natural formation. For example, this article, using Grail gravity gradients, interprets these tubes as lava tubes. Lunar lava tubes produced by ancient lava formed by volcanic eruptions and lava flows billions of years ago. But what's interesting is the size of these things. The extent of the lava tube in this particular study discovered with the Grail probe with the forward method was 60 kilometers in length, 9 kilometers in width, 605 meters in depth, so that's like 1,800 feet in depth, and 55 meters in height. So multiply that by 3 approximately. So that's 180 feet in height approximately. And the gradient features indicate that the skylight located on the eastern side of the tube, so there's an entrance at the surface, could serve as an entry to the main part of the lava tube. There is nothing like this found on Earth. No lava tubes of remotely this size exist on Earth. And even on the moon, this particular lava tube discovered is anomalously enormous. There is no other one like it. So when we consider the possibility that there could have been a base on the moon, one of the other points made by people is that lava tubes could be a natural candidate for building a base. In fact, NASA has even considered that for its own future bases on the moon, to basically take a lava tube and to turn it into an underground cavern or base for the astronauts. Well, an ET civilization visiting Earth and wanting to put a base could surely think to do the same thing. Perhaps they took a lava tube and they grew it out and they turned it into a massive underground base.
Can I just exercise my skeptical brain for a moment, Max? Why do we know for sure that they are, quote, lava tubes, i.e., natural objects, how do we know they're not artificially created tunnels with entrance ports?
Yeah, well, they are near ancient lava flows. In this particular
Ah,
case, the argument is that because in these photographs, I will just show an example. These are ancient lava ridges or chains. They say, well, then these tubes underneath could plausibly have been formed by similar volcanic processes
and
billions
how
of
do
years
we
ago.
how do we how do we know that there are tubes? Is this done with lidar imaging that goes under the surface of the moon? How do we know that
Um,
there are tubes, void areas?
yeah, so one is by looking at differences in the gravitational pull of the lunar surface and detecting that there is some sort of gravitational anomaly underneath the surface, which means that there's some missing mass. Another is through lunar radar sounders, used, like, for example, by the Japanese probe Selene. So, ground penetrating radar, in other words. These are the two main methods that have been used to make these inferences of these large underground spaces. But the point I would make is that even if the lava tubes were formed naturally, that doesn't rule out the possibility that they were actually occupied and turned into something. And it doesn't
Sure.
rule out the possibility that a smaller lava tube originally was formed and then it was expanded through construction activity, like Paul Davies and his colleague, for example, suggested could have occurred. So these are consistent with the possibility of with a natural um, process explanation of the lava tubes, or at
But
least
whatever
some.
it is, the science is suggesting there are massive voids,
Yes,
kilometers long, under the surface of the moon.
yeah, yeah, 60 kilometers long, so about 180 miles in length, and so 27 kilometers in width, 27 miles in width. These are enormous, enormous structures. And again, it's only logical, I think, to send a probe there to go inside of them and look around and see what might be there. And
Wow.
so
Does
that
NASA
is,
talk? Does NASA talk about this at all? I mean, it's great that it's being looked at, presumably by Chinese scientists. It's interesting that China's taking a close interest. But does NASA acknowledge that these tubes are real?
yes, NASA acknowledges that, but they say that these are just naturally formed. They never discuss the possibility of them as technological signatures or as perhaps being the locations of potential extraterrestrial bases from a past ET visitation of the moon. Um, they only talk about it as a natural formation and as a promising candidate for a future lunar base to be built inside of.
Sure.
But people who do talk about it in the context of technological signatures are people like, Paul Davies in that article, and my colleagues at the Society for Planetary SETI Research, um, and maybe other people involved in SETI research as well. But NASA generally avoids talking about things like that.
Fascinating. This
Yeah.
gets more and more fascinating. Gee, Max, there's just so much here. I mean, we're probably now at um, dozens of dozens of places on the moon that really do beg the question. I'm wondering whether in today's show we're going to get to Mars because there's so much still on the moon.
Yeah, well, I was going to say some things about the Artemis 2 astronauts' observations and some interesting anomalies there, but I could also just jump to Mars, however you
Well, no,
feel.
let's. I'm interested to hear because one thing I'm fascinated by is that Elon Musk for years has been going on and on and on about the need to get to Mars as quickly as possible, and now he's kind of abandoned overnight
Yes.
the idea of going to Mars in the short term, and he's focusing now very much on this lunar operation. And I'm intrigued why. I'm really fascinated what's going on behind the scenes. So what's going on with the Artemis astronauts?
Well, in terms of the Artemis astronauts, there are two things I would want to comment on that I think are interesting and worth commenting on. The first is, let me start here. So NBC News had these live updates of what the astronauts were seeing when the mission was happening, as they were orbiting the moon or flying around the moon. One of the observations made was that the crew reports seeing 4 impact flashes as asteroids strike the moon. So Reed Wiseman said he saw 2 impacts, and Hansen saw another 2 on the dark side of the moon, or the side of the moon that was dark. So they saw visible glints of light, which they attributed to asteroid strikes.
You don't?
Yeah, so I think that they are slightly misleading the public, if not considerably so. Now, why do I say that? If you remember in the first interview, or rather it was the second interview, I showed a video of an interview of Farouk El-Baz, the chief lunar geologist of the Apollo missions, who recounted an incident during Apollo 16 when I think it was Mattingly, the astronaut Mattingly, I think he was either the pilot or the commander, he said he saw a flash of light on the lunar surface. And he reported it to Mission Control. And El-Baz said to him, okay, when you come around the moon again, keep an eye out for another flash. And if it happens, we're going to look at the seismometers. Well, they actually said they looked at the seismometers that they left on the moon in previous missions, which measure vibrations of the moon's surface. And they said they found no indication of any sort of blips in the seismometer activities that would be consistent with an asteroid strike.
So if there was an asteroid, that hit the moon,
yes,
that was large enough to generate a flash of light, you would expect to see some kind of seismic disturbance.
Exactly right. And El-Baz says we didn't see it on the first incident, and then he said keep an eye out, and if you see another flash, we're going to look again. And so, sure enough, Mattingly saw another flash in a different part of the moon. And El-Baz and his team looked at the seismometers, and there was no change, no change in activity. And he says at the end of the interview, so it remains a mystery to this day. We don't know what causes these flashes. Harrison Schmitt in Apollo 17 also saw multiple flashes of light. And again, but nobody at the time had correlated it with seismometer activity. Now, to my surprise, NASA recently published a paper examining the Apollo astronauts' observations of light flashes with seismic data from the seismometers on the moon's surface. And then they talked about it in connection with the Artemis observations. So this was really just published like very recently after the Artemis mission, or rather just before the Artemis mission, if I remember correctly. What they find, the bottom line is that this team of NASA scientists, they note that during Apollo 16 and 17 missions, astronauts reported 3 candidate impact flashes on the lunar surface. These occurred when 4 seismic stations on the Apollo seismic network were recording data on the moon. Harrison Schmitt, who's one of the authors of this paper, suggested that the timing and location of the impact flashes should be cross-referenced against seismic data, but no analysis of this type had ever been published before, so they did it. And what they found is that there was no match. So in other words, the flashes were not matched or correlated at all with any changes in the seismic data. And
so we now have the significance of that is we now have official confirmation in a NASA paper, or at least a paper written by a NASA astronaut, which basically supports the idea that there was no seismic correlation to suggest that those flashes were caused by an asteroid hitting the moon.
Yes.
What could be an alternative explanation for these lunar flashes?
Well, that's essentially the question. Among so-called natural prosaic explanations, one that's been suggested is levitating dust scattering light along the lines of lunar horizon glow. Another has been that there is there are gas jets emitted from certain parts of the moon, and those high pressure gases get ionized by solar wind and reflect the light, and they look like flashes of light. But the authors here actually discuss these possibilities in connection with transient lunar phenomena, but they admit that these are all highly speculative and there's no evidence of outgassing of this type. And so they say it's a mystery. Now, this paper was published before the Artemis mission. Now, Reed Wiseman is just saying confidently that, or the astronauts are saying confidently that, oh yeah, it's asteroid strikes. But if you go and look and ask, how did they confirm that? Was there any seismic activity that confirmed it? No, there was no such evidence or data, at least not that I'm aware of, that I could find. So it remains, I think this is an interesting observation made by the Artemis 2 astronauts.
Sure.
And I think they should not jump to the conclusion that is, oh, it's just merely asteroids hitting the lunar surface.
There's another question for the new NASA administrator. By the way, are there any seismic monitors that are near the locations where the Artemis astronauts saw these lunar flashes? And is it possible that we might be able to see if there is a correlation between the seismic measurements and those lunar flashes that we could have a look at to review this paper?
Yeah. Well, so that's what I initially looked for, to see, did NASA look at their seismometers to see if there was any activity? And I couldn't find any sort of report or discussion of that from NASA. It seems that it just comes down to an assumption that, oh, these must be caused by asteroid strikes because it's been theorized.
Are there seismometers?
Yeah,
I can't even say it.
Seismometers, yeah.
Seismometers. Are there seismometers that would legitimately have likely measured if there were asteroid strikes at the time of the Artemis mission?
That's my understanding. If they're big enough to produce light flashes that the astronauts could see from thousands of miles away from the lunar surface, those should cause reverberations. Keep in mind that when the astronauts did this, I think it was, if I remember correctly, it was Apollo 12. They basically dropped a portion of the lunar module capsule into the lunar surface, and it impacted, and it caused reverberations all around the lunar surface that lasted for, if I'm not mistaken, hours. And the seismometers, which were very far away from them, picked up the reverberations in the lunar surface. So the lunar surface is very sensitive to impacts in that sense. It should be detectable.
Just to develop your theme, if it's full of hollow lava tubes or tunnels, not surprising.
Well, yeah, it's something to consider, and I think that they should not jump to conclusions, or what appear to be jumping to conclusions by just assuming that these light flashes are nothing really remarkable. But kind of along similar lines, Hansen also, at one point, as they were passing by, the moon eclipsed the sun completely. So the sun was much smaller than the moon from their field of view. And they reported something that was also very interesting. Hansen provided a vivid description of the solar eclipse to mission controllers in Houston. Quote, this is Hansen, the astronaut, saying, "One of the other things I want to describe, which was surprising to me, but the entire moon is lit up." He said, "It's glowing behind the entire moon." Hansen said he thought the moon would appear dark against the blackness of space, but the sun lit up the moon from behind. He described the glow as measuring easily 10 widths or diameters of the sun around the entire moon.
Okay, what's an explanation for that, Max?
Well, that's kind of an open question. Here are the images that were taken. This is one of the images taken. So this image was taken by the NASA Artemis 2 astronauts. during the, well, this is now the sun is peeking over the horizon here. This image is with the full eclipse. And notice, so the sun is behind the moon, but there's this glow all around the moon in various directions. And there's lighting here that's being caused by something. They say it's due to earth shine. So the earth is, they say, is illuminating this part of the surface. But it's unusual because one, what is the medium that's in space scattering the sunlight? NASA says they're investigating if it's due to zodiacal, to interplanetary dust, or some sort of coronal mass ejection of some kind. But it's an open question. And if we brighten this image to some degree, this should be taken with a grain of salt, but it appears that there are these bright spots.
Oh, yeah.
In the shadowed area, and this color, discoloration, this greenish discoloration all along the boundary and also around here. And I don't know what explains that. And NASA says they're still investigating what's causing this external glow. And in this image too,
maybe ET left the lights on.
Who knows? Could be. But you get a similar effect here.
Yeah. Oh, that's even more discernible. Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't know if these bright spots are indicative of light being reflected or emanating from the lunar surface that we're seeing more visibly when we increase the exposure. I mean, this is part of the spacecraft and there are these little bright spots too, but this could be a reflection of just ordinary light that's more visible. And also here, this is an interesting image. So the sun is still not quite above the horizon, if I remember correctly in this photograph. And let me just rotate this so that we can get an easier view of what we are, what we want to take a closer look at.
Something's distorting the light.
Yeah, so you notice that there are these streaks that are straight.
Yep.
That are emanating, right? And now NASA says in its image description for this image, it says that these emanating streaks that are moving straight are the corona of the sun from just below the horizon that are shooting up. But I'm not so sure if that's necessarily true because you may remember from the first interview, I discussed the observations of the Apollo 17 astronauts seeing these streamers or beams of light shooting out from the lunar horizon as they were orbiting from and moving from the lunar dark side towards lunar sunrise. So this, to me, looks like it could well be an instance of a streamer, possibly anyway. I think that's another explanation that is worth considering. And
what do you mean? What do you mean a streamer? What does that suggest to you?
So the astronauts in Apollo 17 saw these radially symmetric beams or strips of light shooting out from the horizon, and they deduced that whatever medium is producing the streamer effect is something that is emanating from or extending from the lunar surface. And so by streamer, I just mean this beam or strip of light that is extending at very high altitudes.
But basically what you're expressing there is it's scientifically plausible to you that there is the potential that something artificial is distorting the light in the way to cause those beams of light, those streamers.
Yeah, I think that's possibility. I mean, the astronauts in Apollo 17 thought that it was probably lunar dust scattering sunlight, But we now know that that explanation doesn't really work. So it's got to be something else that is obviously highly anomalous. And so perhaps what the astronauts were seeing here are whatever same mechanism produced the streamers that the astronauts in Apollo 17 saw. Maybe that's what the Artemis 2 astronauts captured in this photograph. This is another image that's, I think, also highly interesting. Notice this is the sun rising, but notice that this rainbow of color is extending over the horizon of the moon into the shadow.
How can that plausibly happen?
Yeah, I don't understand that either, because it would imply that something is refracting the sunlight towards
it suggests that something is refracting the sunlight. Yes.
Yeah. And well, there are not too many things that can do that other than something glass-like, semi-transparent, with refractive indices that are similar to some sort of glass medium. And again, funny thing is NASA does not comment on this. They do not note this or say or try to explain it in the image description. They just kind of leave it there unexplained.
And that's not a camera artifact. That's an actual NASA image that we can be reliably assured is a representation of what was actually seen.
I think so. I mean, NASA does not say it's a camera artifact, and it doesn't look like that to me, as far as I can tell. If someone wants to propose an explanation of what type of camera artifact this could plausibly be, I'm all ears. But the astronauts were thousands of miles away from the moon at the time of this event. And then here's another where the sun is kind of is so bright that there's this odd indentation that again would seem to look like the solar disk. Sunlight is kind of being refracted so that it's producing this deep indentation in the edge of the moon, which doesn't really exist anywhere else on the moon to the same degree.
The blue ghost globe strikes again.
Yeah, perhaps. I'm sure there might well be some sort of connection that has not been elucidated just yet. So yeah, there are these interesting, so far, anomalies of the Artemis 2 mission that have not been really discussed or explained. And so I think that there is something here that is worthy of further study. This is also interesting. This splotch of light in the dark area of the moon after brightening the image. I don't quite understand how that would work, either as a camera artifact or as a natural phenomenon. This is just from increasing the exposure a little bit. So there we go. These are the complete set of lunar anomalies that I had prepared for this session. And I will shift back.
Now,
on share.
We did promise our audience at the beginning of this fascinating delivery that we'd try and get to the Mars locations as well that have stemmed your curiosity, or prompted your curiosity. But I think we might leave that 35 million mile trip for another show. Would you be okay about coming back for a fourth go with Reality Check, Dr. Max Dirakhshani?
I'd be honored to do that, and there is plenty of material for a good long show on Mars, which I think will be of great interest.
I'm very excited. I mean, I'm quite struck by what you've revealed to us today, Max. It really just gets more and more intriguing. There really are genuine anomalous mysteries about the moon, and most notably prompted by what you've uncovered about the latest Artemis mission. It looks like the more we look, the more we see. Dr. Max Dirakhshani, thank you once again for joining Reality Check. We're going to have you back for a fourth bite to go to the red planet, Mars. But thank you for today's exposition. And I assure you, we are pressing hard with NASA to get answers to the questions we've tendered thus far, and we'll be tacking on a few more from the list that you've provided us today. Dr. Max Dirakhshani, thank you so much for joining Reality Check.
Thank you. It was my pleasure, and I look forward to the Mars presentation.